Chapter 222, Roar, 2. Eugene had complicated feelings about the statue that had been erected by Molen. To be honest, he wanted to see it, but if he did see it, he felt like he would be pointlessly overwhelmed by emotions. If he had come to the kingdom of Roar alone, he would have snuck over to take a look at it, but he couldn't do that now. An elbow started poking into Eugene's side. A strangely out-of-place smile hovering on her face, Christina subtly tilted her head towards Eugene and whispered, "How is it?" From just that expression alone, Eugene could tell who was currently in control of Christina's body. It was still Christina, but it seemed that she had given in to the impulse from Anissa's urgings from inside her head due to her own interest in the question. Eugene cleared his throat and lifted his gaze before finally saying, "It's well made." That was Eugene's honest impression. He had seen quite a few statues like this thus far. Right now, a statue of Hamel that Eugene had brought from the Nahama Desert stood in the Lionheart clan's garden. There were statues of Vermouth in Kiel's capital and the Black Lion Castle, as well as a statue of Sienna in Arotha's Meridian Square. Then, in the Plaza of the Sun in Uras, he saw a statue of Anis that floated in the sky. Among all these, the best one by far was the statue right in front of him. The statues that Eugene had seen before now had definitely looked impressive. Anissa's statue in particular had been beautifully decorated with precious jewels. But this one, Eugene declared, it's majestic. The statue that was currently before them was enormous. In that way it definitely felt like Molen. The statue was even taller than an ordinary building. And all of Molen's bulging muscles had been reproduced exactly as they were. The statue depicted a wounded Molen holding the deceased Hamel in his arms. Although it hadn't included their other comrades, the ruined scenery created during a tough battle had been precisely recreated around the statue. And a bit sorrowful, Eugene added. Eugene wasn't shedding any tears. He was enduring the urge to do so. He had already shed many tears in a similar situation, and it was obvious that if he did cry, Anis would tease him so much that it would make him want to kill someone, so Eugene was suppressing his emotions. Sob. Eugene might have been able to endure, but Mare chose not to. With only her face still sticking out of an opening in his cloak, Mare was weeping openly. Christina was awkwardly donning a mischievous smile as if she meant to imitate Anis, but her eyes were filled with tears. Cyan broke the silence. "Is there really a scene like this in the fairy tale?" Seal shrugged. "The fairy tale is just a fairy tale after all. We don't even know who wrote it, so maybe it was altered quite a bit. Even so, I quite liked the romance between the stupid Hamel and the wise Sienna," Cyan murmured. Both Seal and Cyan were impressed by the statue. Seal laughed at her brother's muttered confession and shook her head. "What do you know, brother? What the fairy tale was trying to subtly touch your heart with wasn't the romance between the stupid Hamel and the wise Sienna. Then what was it trying to promote?" Cyan asked. "The friendship between comrades? That's also a great motif, but I liked the relationship between the faithful Anis and the stupid Hamel," Seal declared. Cyan paused in disbelief. "Why those two? In the fairy tale, the one that Hamel liked was Sienna. Although that's what he confessed in his final moments, the subtle mood between Hamel and Anis revealed throughout the fairy tale is very interesting. Should I describe it as very imagination-provoking? There were also a few things that allude to something more," Seal explained excitedly. Cyan frowned. "I never saw anything like that. Sienna and Hamel feel more like close friends than lovers, but Anis and Hamel have a mutual respect for each other, so..." What's the point of talking to you about this?" Seal shook her head as if mocking Cyan. Eugene, who had been listening to this talk in silence, felt as if his clothes had been stripped off in public, so he kept his mouth shut firmly. "That little cutie really knows something," Anis commented. "Is that really in the fairy tale?" Christina asked doubtfully. "It's not like I could write the details about my stigmata in the fairy tale. That selfish Sienna showed her ugliness by willfully unveiling her selfish desires, but I couldn't do that. I was supposed to be innocent and pure after all. So I told the story of Hamel and myself in a way that only a few who have great sensitivity like that cutie would sense something." Just earlier, Anis had called Seal a cunning bitch, but at some point she had changed Seal's label to a cutie. "But in the end, Sir Hamel was the only one who died," Cyan muttered. "Sir Hamel didn't die because he was weak. He bravely and beautifully sacrificed his own life for the sake of his fellow comrades." Eugene was the one who replied to him. 300 years ago, because of Sir Hamel's sacrifice, our ancestor and his comrades could climb all the way to the castle of the Demon King of Incarceration. Although the later generations ridicule Sir Hamel as being stupid because of that bullshit. No, that ridiculous fairy tale, as someone who sacrificed himself for the sake of his comrades and for the sake of a world that left him with no choice but to do so, Sir Hamel can truly be called a hero. Seal and Cyan both blinked in surprise at Eugene's long speech. Mare, who had been looking at the statue with a moved expression, couldn't bear to listen any longer, so she hid her head back inside the cloak. Christina's hooded eyes suddenly widened in shock as she stared at Eugene. Isn't he embarrassed to say all that? Eugene might be unable to hear Anissa's murmurs, but he could easily imagine what Anisse might be muttering to herself. As such, Eugene cleared his throat and shook his head. In any case, about Sir Hamel, I'm just trying to say that he's a very underrated hero by the later generations. Oh, right. Cyan gaped with a confused expression before suddenly nodding. That was the case, wasn't it? Eugene, you're the one who personally discovered Sir Hamel's grave, so, because you're the successor to his legacy, it makes sense that you would have different feelings toward this statue than we do. Quite kindly, Cyan showed a great sense of understanding towards this non-blood-related brother of his, who seemed to have gotten overly immersed in a fairy tale. Snow was starting to fall. We never even said a word about Sir Hamel being weak, Seal pouted as she pulled her hood back over her head. Who doesn't know how strong Sir Hamel was? But, of course, among the heroes from 300 years ago, the strongest was our ancestor. Of course he was, Cyan also affirmed as he looked back up at the statue with a proud expression. As he was staring up at Molin's statue, which seemed as huge as a mountain, Cyan grew lost in thought for a few moments. Eventually Cyan asked, just how strong was Sir Molin? Seal hummed curiously. Just look at those muscles, Cyan pointed out. It might just be a statue, but it's not like they'd make it bulkier than the real thing, right? Sir Hamel looks like a child when he's being held in Sir Molin's arms. Who was the strongest among the heroes from 300 years ago? There was no real need to think about such a question. The answer was the master of the Holy Sword and the hero, the Great Vermouth. Everyone in the world considered Vermouth to be the peak of all the heroes. But among the remaining four, while the wise Sienna and the faithful Anisse were out of contention because they weren't warriors, the stupid Hamel and the brave Molin were warriors. As such, the question of which of the two was stronger was a topic of debate that was brought up all the time. Seal chided, "Are you an idiot, brother? Just because your muscles are bigger, that doesn't make you stronger. Just look at that pig Gargith. His forearms are thicker and his muscles are more bulging, but he's no better than Eugene. No, he's even weaker than me." That might be true, Cyan conceded. However, I still think that Sir Molin might have been stronger than Sir Hamel. Seal considered this. Maybe. After all, 300 years ago, Sir Hamel was the only one who died. Christina, who had been listening to the conversation between the two, glanced at Eugene nervously. As she had expected, Eugene's brows were twitching in anger. What kind of bullshit is that? Eugene cursed. Sir Hamel was stronger than Sir Molin. And how would you know that? Cyan challenged. How else would I know? Eugene shouted, only to hesitate. Sir Hamel. Look, just from his face you can tell he's stronger than Sir Molin. Don't you see that scar over there? Of course, Sir Hamel died first and he might have been smaller than Sir Molin, but do you really think that fights are just decided based on fucking size? Sir Hamel was a better fighter than Sir Molin. Eugene stopped talking mid-sentence and turned his head. He had suddenly felt a piercing gaze directed at him. The place from which he had felt that gaze was quite far from this square, but he sensed the presence narrowing the distance in an instant. From the palace? Behind the statue on the other side of the square, stood a huge castle surrounded by tall walls. This was the royal palace of Roar. It was from the palace's lofty spire, through the fluttering snow, that Eugene had first felt that gaze. However, now it was right on top of them. Eugene reflexively took a few steps backward, pulling Christina, Seal and Cyan along with his magic. But there didn't seem to have been any need for that. The approaching presence showed no signs of hostility, and even though he was falling here from a great height, no one was in any danger. A thick cloak fluttered behind the descending figure. Everyone looked up with shocked eyes. The one who had come flying from the tall spire to land in front of the statue in a crouch was a giant of a man. Straightening up from his crouch, The man roughly brushed back the hair that had fallen over his eyes. Humph. The man appeared to be middle-aged with windswept hair, a roughly shaven beard and darkly tanned skin. Eugene noticed a crown on top of the man's head that was tilted to the side as if it could fall off at any moment. "Nice to see you, young ones," the man began speaking. Then with a wide grin that showed off his gums, the man spread his arms wide, baring his chest. "We hope that you're not too offended by our intrusion. I was having fun listening to the cute conversation between you young ones, but as a descendant of the Bold King, I couldn't continue to just listen silently." The Bold King was a term used to refer to the founding king of Ruhr, Molin. But in fact, aside from Molin, there was one other person in Ruhr who was entitled to address himself by the pronoun we. Sion was so startled that his hair stood on end, and he immediately knelt on the spot. The descendant of the Lionheart clan, Sion Lionheart, is honored to meet His Royal Highness, the King of Ruhr. Seal and Christina also hurriedly knelt down and curtsied. For now, Eugene also decided to get on one knee, as the reaction from their surroundings seemed unusual. Even though this was the sudden appearance of the King of Ruhr, the people in the plaza only spared a glance towards him, not showing any particular reverence. "Ah, you young ones are embarrassing us. Since we were the one to jump in on you in the first place, there's no need to be so polite. Aren't your knees getting wet from the snow on the ground? If you want to kneel down and pay your courtesies to us instead of doing it in a place like this, why don't you visit us in our castle?" the king invited them. This was the current king of the Ruhr kingdom, the beast King Amon Ruhr. Letting out a hearty laugh, he straightened his tilted crown and continued speaking. "Furthermore, we didn't come here just to hear the greetings from you young ones. Look here, young Lionheart," Amon's grinning eyes turned to Eugene. "You're the one who said that the Bold King was weaker than Sir Hamel, right? I can't accept those words. While of course the Great Vermouth must have been the strongest still among the heroes from that era, the strongest besides Sir Vermouth was the Bold King." Yeah," Eugene eventually responded with a puzzled expression. While everyone was still down on one knee, Amon strode over to grab them by the arms and lift them up from their bent positions one by one. "Sion Lionheart," Amon roared cheerfully, "a descendant of the Great Vermouth. I'm well aware that you are the next in line for the patriarch of the Lionheart clan. Though it hasn't been confirmed yet, our daughter may soon be engaged to you." Sion was similarly hesitant. Yes? "In fact, we have no desire to decide on our daughter's marriage for political reasons," Amon confessed. "The most important thing will be whether our daughter wants to marry you or not. Though of course our daughter isn't yet old enough for such things." Sion frantically scoured his memory. "Princess Isla's current age is, I recall that she's 11, but if you do wish to marry our daughter, you will need to work hard starting now to sway her heart. Alright, since we happen to have met like this, allow us to tell you a secret. Our daughter, Isla, prefers rare weapons and armor over dolls and bouquets. If you wish to impress Isla, it would be better for you to gift her with a small dagger," Amon advised with a chuckle and patted Sion on the shoulder. They may have just been intended as friendly taps, but each time Amon's large hand landed on his shoulder with a bang-bang sound, Sion's whole body shook. Amon turned to Seal. "Seal Lionheart, we have also heard about you. Indeed, you are just as fair and beautiful as a snowflake. I've heard that Carmen Lionheart, a heroine who has received our recognition for her strength, is your teacher, correct?" "You flatter me, Your Majesty," Seal responded politely. "Flattery? Are you referring to our compliments on your looks? Flattery, you say, ha. With your beauty, humility is a luxury you can't afford." "No, that's not it. As a descendant of the Lionhearts, could it be that you are dissatisfied with being complimented for your looks? In that case, I'm curious to see how sharp your sword is," Amon mused insightfully. Seal couldn't escape from Amon's huge hand either. But it was only after Amon had stepped past her that Seal allowed her expression to crumple as she rubbed her aching shoulder. "And you, to think that it would be Ura's saint candidate, Christina Rogerus. We do not worship the god of light, but we are still in awe of the miracles that can be performed by the followers of the light. Among all those we have seen, the miracles performed by your adoptive father, Cardinal Sergio Rogerus, were particularly impressive," Amon complimented. Christina greeted him stiffly. "It's an honor to meet you like this." Amon noticed her discomfort. It seems that we shouldn't have carelessly brought up the unfortunate death of your adoptive father. May the light protect you. Amon didn't pound on Krasitna's shoulders. He instead reached out with his own large hand to shake her hand, and with a bow of her head, Christina took his hand with both of hers. Eugene Lionheart. Amon finally turned to Eugene. Striding over with a hearty smile, Amon looked down at Eugene and said, "The foster child of the main family. The second coming of the great Vermouth. The wise Sienna's successor. But it seems that those aren't the end of it. Were you eavesdropping on our conversation from such a long distance away?" Eugene accused. "Please don't think that we were intentionally eavesdropping. Our ears are extremely sharp, so we can hear all sorts of things without even intending to. However, we must still offer our apologies for something else." Amon lifted the crown that he was wearing on his head with one hand as he slightly lowered his head in apology. "From the moment you entered this square, we have been watching you with great interest. We were merely confirming the news that the younger generation of the Lionheart clan had arrived in Roar through the warp gate." Eugene shook his head. "I'm not offended by that information. After all, your majesty is the king of this country, right? Ahaha. There is no law saying that it's all right to observe and spy on others just because you're the king. At least there isn't such a law in this country," Amon stated proudly as his large hand patted Eugene's shoulder. Bang bang. The sound might have been just as loud, but Eugene's body didn't shake like Cyan and Seal's had. Amon's eyes grew cheerful at this sight. "So then, Eugene Lionheart, what is your opinion?" Amon asked seriously. Eugene frowned. "What opinion are you talking about? Do you really not know what we are asking, or are you just pretending? You said that Sir Hamel is stronger than the bold king. However, we choose to disagree." Amon lowered his body to bring himself close to Eugene. Eugene realized why Amon was called the Beast King. He also saw the proof that Molin was indeed Amon's ancestor. As they stared piercingly at Eugene, Amon's eyes were just as clear as Molin's, and the same intense desire for conflict that had once swum in Molin's eyes could also be seen in his. However, unlike Molin, Amon wouldn't restrain his desires on the grounds that they were comrades. In Amon's eyes, a wild, bestial spirit was stirring apart from the dignity that came from being the king of a country. "If you continue to insist on Sir Hamel's superiority, then we, as the descendant of the bold king, must strive to convince you. Don't you think that it would be fun to cross swords for the sake of our friendly relations?" Amon proposed. "How dare I cross swords with you, your majesty?" Eugene tried to evade. "Ahaha. It seems that there is a law in Kiel that states you must not draw your sword against the emperor, right? But something like that has no relevance here. No matter who it is, if they so desire, we will gladly exchange blades with them," Amon declared with loud laughter as he straightened up his lowered body. As if to demonstrate, Amon looked around the square, and indeed the people of Roar who were out in the square were looking in this direction with eyes full of amusement and curiosity instead of anger and concern. "I'm afraid I will have to decline," Eugene politely rejected. To be honest, Eugene did want to compete with Molin's descendants. However, Eugene didn't want to face Amon in the middle of a square full of watching eyes on the very day he had entered Roar. "Is that so? Then it can't be helped. It's not like today will be the only chance we will get for it," Amon sighed. Now that Eugene had refused, Amon also didn't continue to insist. He patted Eugene on the shoulder once more and said with a grin, "It's fine even if it's in the middle of the night march, so if you ever wish to compete with us, come visit us at any time. These words aren't just for you, Eugene. Cyan Lionheart and Seal Lionheart as well. If you too so desire, you can come to us any time. We will be happy to show you the martial arts that have been passed down to us from the bold king. Would it be all right for me to ask you something?" Eugene asked after clearing his throat and looking back up at Amon. "Sir Molin. No, did the bold king himself ever say something like that directly? That he was stronger than Sir Hamel?" "Ahaha. He never said anything like that. He didn't leave such words in any of the historical records either. Of course, he did often mention Sir Hamel in those while calling him a dear comrade and friend. Although he said that he really wanted to seriously compete with Hamel at least once, they never actually managed to compete because they never got the chance to." Amon trailed off with a grin. He then leaned over slightly towards Eugene and whispered, "However, this information is written down in the annals of Roar. According to the words of the bold king 300 years ago, the person with the most physical strength next to the great Vermouth was Molin himself. If that's the case, Then doesn't this naturally mean that the bold king was stronger than Sir Hamel? Was this a provocation? Eugene smiled stiffly and nodded. I guess that's true. Amon laughed smugly. Aha. Well, it's only natural. Just by looking at this statue you can tell that the bold king was stronger than Sir Hamel. But what will you all be doing now? I've heard reports that you're not traveling with the Lionheart clan's main force but are instead heading to Lehane independently. Yes, we plan on heading to Lehane right away, Eugene revealed. It seems that you're in a hurry, Amon observed. If your preparations are inadequate or you're anxious about the journey, how about accompanying us? You can rest well in the palace and leave for Lehane when we and the Knights of Ruhr do. Although I'm grateful for your words, I'm afraid I'll have to decline. However, why haven't you departed yet, Your Majesty? Eugene inquired. It is because we haven't yet finished dealing with the affairs of state, Amon admitted. We and our Knights of Ruhr will most likely be able to depart next week. Amon blinked for a few moments. Then he made an oops sound and smacked his own forehead. We really should be more careful with our words, Amon chided himself. Hector Lionheart, the one who participated in that upheaval at the Black Lion Castle last year. He was an honorary Knight of the White Fangs, wasn't he? As far as I know, all discussions considering that issue have already been concluded. Even though Hector was an honorary Knight of the White Fangs cannot be held accountable for what he did at the Black Lion Castle, Eugene assured him. However, wasn't it still our mistake to make such a deplorable man an honorary knight? As such, we feel that we must do something to aid you on your journey, Amon insisted. Eugene didn't really think it was necessary, but Amon just stood there absent-mindedly, lost in thought for a few moments. Then he suddenly smiled and looked down at Eugene with a nod. Just wait here for a few moments. Huh. Boom. Amon kicked off the ground and leaped into the air. With just one leap, he flew through the air and crossed the large distance between the square and the palace spire that he had first flown from. Just what on earth? Cyan questioned dumbfoundedly, still having yet to come to his senses. Just as Amon had said, it couldn't have been more than a few moments before he returned. Just like when he first arrived, he leaped over from the palace and landed in the square, but unlike that last time, he wasn't alone. We shall allow our pet dog to go with you, Amon stated generously. The pet dog wasn't the kind of cute puppy that the words brought to mind. Though Amon was a giant of a man, the body of the wolf he had brought with him on his shoulders was even bigger than Amon was. His name is Abel. He's a descendant of the Snowfield wolves, which have been bred by the Buyur tribe since long ago and have been raised within the royal palace since the founding of this kingdom. This guy won't get lost in a blizzard or even in the flat, featureless, white snowfields. If you're accompanied by Abel, you should be able to reach Lehane without getting lost, Amon stated. The snowfield wolf that Amon lowered to the ground was as big as an ox, but it didn't seem anywhere as dull-witted as an ox. Amon grinned as he stroked Abel's gray fur. Abel, Amon instructed, guide these young lions to the training grounds at Lehane. Woof. That's right, there's a good boy. Abel let out a loud howl. Turning back to the group, Amon explained, you don't have to worry about Abel's food because this clever guy can hunt down his own food. If one of you injures your leg on the way there, it's fine if you need to ride on Abel's back. Eugene hesitated. Yes. As long as you stick to the path that Abel leads you on, you should have more than enough time to cross the snowfields. Young ones, are you interested in sightseeing? Amon suddenly asked. Did you say, sightseeing? Eugene repeated. Amon nodded. Lehanjar might be dangerous, but it's a fascinating place. It was the most dangerous mountain in Ruhr, a place where the snowy mountain rangers and knights would occasionally visit for training. If you feel the urge, you should go take a look at the Grand Hammer Canyon, Amon recommended. And where is that exactly? Eugene inquired. If you want to go, Abel can lead you there. You don't need to be able to speak wolf, this clever guy. If you tell him that you want to go to the Grand Hammer Canyon, he will guide you there immediately, Amon said with a wide smile that showed off his gums. That's where the legends of the royal family are passed down. Legends? Eugene repeated curiously. It's also the place where the descendants of the royal family are reborn as warriors, Amon said without any further explanation as he turned away. Of course, it's up to you whether to go or not. With those last words, Amon kicked off the ground once again. Boom. With a loud roar, Amon flew back to the palace. What an extremely free-spirited king, Sion muttered as he watched Amon's back disappear within mere moments. Chapter 223, Roar 3. Eugene had felt the need to find a guide. Most of the Roar Kingdom's territory was snowfields covered in blizzards, but if one considered it simply in terms of land mass, it was large enough to be comparable to the Kiel Empire. But since most of the kingdom's population lived in the cities, the vast snowfields were the home of the natives who refused to mix into the cities. They weren't as savage as the natives of the Samar rainforest, but Eugene had heard that they were eccentric enough to reject civilization and insist on surviving out in the harsh snowfields. The snowfields were an even harsher locale than the rainforest. In the first place, it wasn't easy to forage for food, and if you were to fall into a crevasse while walking carelessly, a pointless death was a real possibility. There were also the blizzards that swirled up from time to time, and one needed to be careful of avalanches in the mountainous areas. In the rainforest, all one needed to worry about were things like attacks from the savage natives or monsters, but in the snowfields, one needed to be more cautious of the immensity of nature. There were fields of white snow everywhere you looked, so losing your sense of direction was easy. Even if you used a map, a compass, or an enchanted guidebook, it was still easy to lose your way in the snowfields. That was why people who wanted to cross the snowfields often hired the natives living in those lands as guides. But thanks to the King of Roar's consideration, there was no longer any need for them to hire a guide. Woof woof. Having emerged from the cloak, Mare approached Abel with her eyes shining brightly. Woof woof. Mare tried to imitate a dog's bark once more, but Abel just stared at Mare, lazily blinking his golden eyes. Unable to get him to show the reaction she had hoped for, Mare pouted her lips and crept closer to Abel. Hand, Mare instructed when she finally stood in front of the large wolf and stretched out her own hand. And as expected, Abel proved to be just as smart as Amon had said. Mare smiled broadly as she looked down to see Abel's large front paw draped lightly over her tiny hand. It's okay if I ride on his back, right? Mare pleaded. Eugene pointed out, wouldn't it be more comfortable to travel inside my cloak than on the back of a wolf? Either way, it's more comfortable than walking on my own. Also, it's no fun to be stuck inside your cloak, Sir Eugene, and I've gotten sick of it after standing inside there for so long, Mare complained as she quickly climbed onto Abel's back. Mare might have been a young girl, but she was also a familiar, so she didn't actually weigh much. On top of that, perhaps because of Abel's huge size and excellent strength, he showed no signs of difficulty at having Mare ride on his back as he looked to Eugene for instruction. Eugene considered Mare silently. It's no fun and she was bored of it. Mare may have said those words without giving them much thought, but Eugene felt a little sullen because of it. However, if he acknowledged and expressed this feeling, he felt like he would be admitting that he had lost to this mutt, so Eugene kept his mouth shut. Anise suddenly remarked, as Molin's descendant, he really does resemble Molin. But he doesn't look like the same sort of fool that Molin was. Though it makes sense, there's no way that a fool would become a king, Eugene responded. Molin was also a fool, but he was actually pretty good at handling state affairs, Anise revealed. Eugene scoffed. That's just because Molin was strong. 300 years ago, during all that mess, didn't he manage to build a kingdom through strength alone? When a strong man like him said he would be king of this polar region where it's always snowing heavily, who would dare to say anything against that? Anise argued, although it's true that Molin's strength was helpful in the founding of the Ruhr kingdom, the kingdom wasn't established and governed solely by force. Hamel, you should know this as well, right? Molin may have been a fool, but he was also kind, and despite being a fool, he did have a wise side to him. Now that 300 years have passed, he is still called by and praised with the prestigious title of the Bold King because Molin was more of a proper king than the one who ruled your hometown. Fine, I admit it. Molin is great. And I'm worthless. I fucking died first for no reason, and because of that I keep getting called weaker than Molin. As Eugene trailed off into grumbles and repeatedly sighed, Anise, who was still borrowing Christina's body, laughed mockingly. Isn't it just a fact that you were weaker than Molin? You also had a weaker body than he did. Hamel, no one else might be able to tell, but boasting like you were stronger and tougher than Molin in front of me is. Hee. It feels a little cute of you, Anise said with a smirk. What did you just say? Eugene growled. Wasn't it just like I said it was? Whenever a battle was over, you always had more injuries than Molin. And who was the one who had to heal those wounds? Anise asked rhetorically. Sienna, Eugene answered sarcastically. Nope, it was me, Anise insisted. Please don't try to act cute with that useless pride of yours. Without me, Hamel, all your limbs would have been cut off at the roots, and you would have been left with only your torso forced to roll around like a ball. Eugene coughed guiltily. Ahem. But it's not like I was the only one whose limbs were cut off. Molin also lost his legs. That's because Molin always stupidly ran off like a colt with its tail on fire. Anise snorted, then continued, though indeed you were the same in that regard. Eugene couldn't bear to refute Anise's ridicule. If it hadn't been for Anise's miracles, even if all his limbs hadn't been amputated, he felt like he would have at least lost an arm or a leg. A voice suddenly intruded. Just what are you two talking about so secretly? The ongoing conversation between Eugene and Anise couldn't be heard by anyone else. This was because Eugene had concealed each of their voices using magic in order to talk about Molin. The sight of this was very, very, very annoying to Seal. As Seal approached them with her eyes staring piercingly, Eugene replied with a calm expression, "We're talking about the signature that I came up with in Aroth. Why talk about that in secret?" Seal argued. "I'm also curious about your signature. Something like this needs to be seen as a surprise to look cooler and more shocking," Eugene said as an excuse. "So you're keeping it a secret because you want to show it off to me?" Seal asked happily. "Well, something like that," Eugene agreed vaguely. Although Seal didn't like this situation, Eugene's response made her very happy. She withdrew once more with a look that said it couldn't be helped. Eugene turned to Anise. "So, Lehanjar, what do you think about it?" Molin's descendant didn't explain anything properly, but wasn't he quite explicit in suggesting you go there? "No way, Hamel. Do you actually think he might have set a trap for you?" Anise asked in disbelief. "Isn't that still a possibility? How could a descendant of Molin use such petty tricks as laying a trap?" "Even among Vermouth's descendants there are idiots," Eugene pointed out. Anise conceded the point. "That might be the case, but if we really fall into a trap set by a descendant of Molin, I'd be so ashamed that I would never be able to ascend to the heavens and instead become an evil spirit." Eugene also readily agreed. "I'd also be just as ashamed, enough to kill myself by burying my nose in a saucer of water." For now they would just keep their guard up, but what reason would the Beast King have for laying such a trap? As far as Eugene was aware, the Lionhearts and the royal family of Roer had quite an amicable relationship. Since the war ended 300 years ago, Vermouth had strangely distanced himself from his former comrades. Molin was no exception to this. But after Molin had abdicated the throne and a funeral had officially been held for Vermouth, the kings who succeeded the throne of Roer sought to establish a good relationship with the Lionheart clan, even if they still weren't that close. Every year on the patriarch's birthday, letters and gifts would be sent from Roer, and currently, there were even talks about marrying the next patriarch Cyan to the princess of Roer. Perhaps Molin might have gone into seclusion in that place called the Great Hammer Canyon? Anise proposed. Anise was also well aware of why it had been decided that the night march would be held in the kingdom of Roer. It was all because of the brave Molin who had gone into seclusion 100 years ago. By holding it here they hoped to rouse him from his solitude. Hamoy, hee. Though it seems that you don't really like to be called as such, at least for now. Aren't you called the second coming of Vermouth? Also, Christina happens to look exactly like I did, Anise pointed out with a giggle. Eugene couldn't respond to this. It's unknown whether Molin is still secretly in contact with the royal family of Roer even after going into seclusion. And if he really did go to the Great Hammer Canyon for his seclusion, he should be able to notice us once we arrive there, even if he's far away, Anise speculated. Eugene snorted. That fool will probably be surprised and come over running like crazy. If it was Molin, that definitely felt like what he would do. As Eugene grinned while imagining such a sight, Anise also nodded slightly on the side. However, her smile wasn't as cheerful as Eugene's. That's if Molin hasn't changed from how we remember him to be, Anise brought up cautiously. Eugene didn't respond to those words right away. Instead, he stared at Anise with a calm, assessing gaze. That face might still be Christina's, but even so, Eugene could sense Anise's sorrowful melancholy. There was a slight pause before Eugene responded. He couldn't be entirely sure of what he was saying, but Eugene still tried to project confidence when he assured her, that fool won't have changed even a tiny bit. They once again made use of the warp gate in Hamilon, the capital of Roer, and arrived at the city of Rosrock, which was in the north of Roar. Unfortunately, from this point on, they wouldn't be able to use a warp gate to travel any further and would instead have to traverse the endlessly sprawling snowfields all by themselves. You're going all the way to Lahanjar by foot? You're crazy. Every merchant they met while purchasing supplies for the journey had said the same thing while shaking their heads and clicking their tongues in sympathy. However, even though they called it reckless and foolish, they didn't try to stop Eugene and the others. This was because of the Lionheart sigil embroidered on the chests of the Lionheart trio: Eugene, Seal, and Cyan. I've heard something about that. Apparently, a festival called the Night March is being held at the distant Lahane's training grounds, right? A merchant inquired. I don't know if it can really be called a festival, but yes, Eugene confirmed. A bunch of people from all over the world are gathering to enjoy some loud and boisterous fun. So what else can it be called other than a festival? The merchant pointed out. In any case, thanks to you lot, we merchants are also enjoying ourselves due to this event. Eugene pricked his ears. It seems quite a few people have passed through here already? Isn't it obvious? 1. 3 knightly orders and 4 mercenary companies have already passed through here, and that's just Rosrock alone. The path through Rosrock wasn't the only way to reach Lahane. If you included the troops departing from other cities, the number of troops that would soon be arriving in Lahane would be staggering. The merchant generously offered, since you've bought a lot of goods, I'll tell you this for free. 2 of the knightly orders were just from small countries belonging to the Anti-Demon Alliance. But the last one was a very famous knightly order, Shimuan's Knights of the Violent Tide. As the young master of the Lionheart clan, you should naturally know of them, right? Of course Eugene knew. Theirs was a name that was always brought up whenever the topic of the best knightly orders on the continent was discussed. As Shimuan was a country that claimed to be a land of knights, there were several knightly orders that were sworn to the royal family. Among these knightly orders, the Violent Tide Knights were made up of the elites who were carefully selected from only the most exceptional knights. The commander of their knightly order was the first knight of Shimuan's 12 finest, too. Just like the Knights of the Violent Tide, his name was always brought up whenever someone discussed picking the best knights of the entire continent. How should I describe the first knight? He's a man so sharp that you can almost feel a ghostly aura coming from him. As such, he looked like even more of a contrast when standing next to the Princess Knight. As for her, she looked as clean and pure as a solitary flower. The merchant trailed off in reminiscence. Cyan gave a low cough as the merchant continued muttering. His attention had been drawn to the mention of Shimuan's Princess Knight. Among all of the children of the King of Shimuan, Princess Scalia was said to be uniquely gifted with the sword. Sneaky bastard, Eugene scoffed at Cyan's obvious interest in her gossip. Cyan stammered in protest. W. Along with Princess Isla of Roar, Princess Scalia had also been brought up as one of Cyan's potential fiancés. The merchant continued, as for the mercenary companies, well, they were all fairly large companies, but... although I hope nothing dangerous happens, you never know what people might get up to, so allow me to give you a warning. A warning? Eugene repeated. Among the mercenary companies that passed through Rosrock a few days ago, there was one group called the Black Dog Mercenaries. Though they call themselves a mercenary company, they're dragging around merchant caravans from other snowfields and extorting them under the pretext of escorting them. They're just robbers wearing the mask of a mercenary company, the merchant sniffed. This news didn't come as a surprise to Eugene, who used to work as a mercenary 300 years ago. Merchant caravans were a common customer of mercenaries. As long as a mercenary company had both a lack of conscience and enough ability, after killing or crippling the original escort warriors hired by the merchant caravans, they could force the merchants to sign an unfair contract while claiming to be the ones who would escort them from now on. Naturally, the contracts that were signed like this weren't anything like proper contracts, and most of them made the merchant caravans pay an additional fee for the amount of time they were dragged around by the mercenary company. Those black dogs probably won't dare to play tricks on the young masters from the Lionheart clan, but the snowfields are wide and you never know what might happen, the merchant earnestly cautioned them. The best solution would be to avoid getting entangled with them in the first place. If you see the flag of the black dogs from a distance, don't needlessly try to confront them and just go your own way. Eugene accepted the warning. Thank you for your advice. By the way, have you considered borrowing a few more wolves? The merchant recommended. It seems that there aren't too many of you, and if it's a group of about 5 people, it would be better to use a wolf sled. It's fine, Eugene assured him. He actually had thought about hiring a sleigh to ride, but after considering it several times, he realized that they didn't really have a need for it. After all, wouldn't it be more convenient just to use magic? Eugene said mostly to himself. Well, it should be easier for you, the merchant agreed. The spell that was used to keep one's feet from sliding in the snow wasn't a very advanced spell, and while lasting for a long time, it didn't even consume much mana. However, Eugene had no intention of allowing the use of such a convenient spell. Eugene turned to Seal and Cyan. You two, your white flame formulas are still on the 4th star, right? At our age, the 4th star is still very high, Cyan insisted sulkily. Eugene argued back. But even though I'm the same age as you, I'm already on the 6th star, no? That's because you're a monster, you bastard, Cyan growled, his brow furrowing as he tried to hold back his hurt pride. Eugene got to the point. You weren't waiting for me to go with you just because you thought that would make the trip easier and pain-free, right? Cyan knew that he wasn't as talented as Eugene. As a result, he probably wouldn't be able to surpass Eugene for the rest of his life. Cyan had become painfully aware of this fact early on, and he was well aware that no matter how jealous he became, it wouldn't be able to change the reality of this situation. And Scylla was the one who taught Cyan how to use his brother Eugene from an early age. Cyan could be jealous, but he shouldn't be envious. Even though Cyan knew that he wouldn't be able to surpass Eugene, he should still strive to do so. Even if they weren't real brothers, Cyan should treat him like a real brother and learn to depend on each other. He needed to build up such a friendship between them so that Cyan would never need to betray him or be betrayed. Will this really help? Cyan reluctantly asked. Have I ever made you do anything that wouldn't be helpful to you? Eugene said with a grin as he patted Cyan on the shoulder. This was the truth. Cyan's white flame formula had been able to rise up to the 4th star in the first place because he had received various bits of advice from Eugene about how to train in the white flame formula. That advice had also been applied equally to Seal. Fine, Cyan huffed as he made up his mind and immediately took off his shoes. As this left him standing barefoot in the snow, the icy chill sent shocks up and down his spine. While precisely operating the white flame formula, Cyan warmed himself up with a minimal amount of mana. With that, he slowly began to walk, taking careful steps forwards. For the purpose of this training, Cyan wasn't allowed to sink into the snow. There shouldn't even be any footprints left. It seemed simple at first glance, but this actually required meticulous and continuous manipulation of his mana. Excessively outputting their mana would be meaningless. So what Eugene had asked Seal and Cyan to do was to walk on the snow while using the minimal amount of mana so that their white flame formula wouldn't release any sparks. Ugh. Seal was disgusted by the need to be barefoot, but she still listened to Eugene's instructions. Carefully cradling her boots, she walked over the snow cautiously. When Eugene casually approached her to try and hold on to her boots, Seal leaped back away from Eugene in fright. What are you doing? Seal yelped. No. It seemed that it would be inconvenient for you to carry your shoes with you, so I was just going to put them in my cloak, Eugene said hesitantly. Seal firmly rejected this offer. No way, there's no way that I'm letting you do that. I'll take care of my boots on my own, so don't even think about it. Eugene cocked an eyebrow. Are you worried they'll smell? Seal's face turned pale at Eugene's question. Eugene sighed. You've been like that since you were young. I've never once thought there was a weird smell coming from your body. But a few years ago, you refused to even do any training outside because you didn't want to give off the smell of sweat. Why are you bringing up something from the distant past? Seal shrieked. Eugene just grumbled. It wasn't even that long ago, maybe 4 years or so. In any case, you won't give off any strange odors, so don't pointlessly hold on to those shoes and give them to me. You son of a bitch. I knew you were lacking in consideration, but this is going too far. Do you really think I truly believed that some kind of strange smell was coming from my body? It's just that I was too shy and embarrassed. Get lost. Seal screeched like a banshee as she swung her boots threateningly. Due to her strong resistance, Eugene couldn't keep persuading her and had to back off. Sir Eugene, you are the one in the wrong, Christina muttered from deep within the thick fur coat that she was wearing. At these words, Eugene turned his gaze towards her with a look that spoke of his feelings of unjust. Just what did I do wrong? You're lacking in consideration for a girl's heart, Christina said as she clicked her tongue and shook her head. Mare also stared at Eugene with narrowed eyes as she accompanied Christina in clicking her tongue. Mare seemed to be quite happy sitting on Abel's back, so they had even bought a saddle she could sit on while riding him. A young girl wearing a fluffy-looking hat was sitting on the back of a wolf as big as an ox. That wolf was also responsible for determining their party's direction and leading them. The twin siblings were following behind the wolf on bare feet, and a man wearing an oversized cloak was watching over the siblings with a stern look in his eye. A woman wearing a coat was also sticking to that man's side. Several parties were leaving the gates of Rossrock at the same time, but none were as unique as Eugene's. Seal's face flushed red as she felt the gazes staring at her as if enjoying the show. "If you keep mincing along like that, just when do you think we'll get there?" "Run!" Eugene roared. "How yay!" Mare also shouted as she patted Abel's nape. Abel started running across the snowfield. As a result, Cyan and Seal had no choice but to begin running diligently while barefoot. There's no need for us to run like this." Seal gasped. "You need to run if we plan on arriving quickly," Eugene argued. "But I bet you didn't run like this in Samar." Seal cried out in a sorrowful voice. Just why had Seal decided to split off from the Lionheart clan's main force to wait for Eugene? It was because she didn't want Christina and Eugene to travel alone together, all buddy-buddy like they had in Samar. It was all because Seal couldn't bear the thought of allowing them to just leisurely make their way to Lehane on their own. Because there had been an increase in their training ahead of the night march, Seal hadn't been able to follow Eugene to Aroth. But this time she would finally be able to travel together with him. But just what was going on now? They should be riding around in a large rented sleigh while using magic to circulate warm air around them. Seal had been hoping for a chance to chat with each other while they built a bonfire at night and made memories while looking at the stars. So why was she currently barefoot, chasing that huge wolf's ass? "Didn't I run around a lot in Samar?" Eugene asked as he tilted his head, unable to understand what Seal meant by her miserable cry. "Sir Eugene did run while I flew behind him," Christina affirmed before spreading her own wings in a demonstration. Of course she hadn't unfurled all 8 of her wings. It was the divine spell that she had used while they were traveling through Samar, the Wings of Light. But with Christina's current strength, even if she flew for several days while using the Wings of Light, she wouldn't run out of divine power. "Lady Seal, it seems that you misunderstand something. Sir Eugene and I faithfully carried out our mission while we were in Samar. Every day we were busy traveling while also being on guard for surprise attacks. I'm actually more relaxed now than I was back then," Christina whispered softly as she flew over to Seal at a low height. However, Seal couldn't afford to respond to her. Although she hadn't had any problems while walking slowly, she was currently limiting the output of the white flame formula, protecting her feet from getting frostbite, and manipulating her mana so that she didn't sink into the snow, all while running. So while Seal had to keep focused on just maintaining her breathing, all she could do was glare at Christina. Of course, Christina wasn't as burdened or as busy as Seal. She fluttered her wings proudly as she lay down in midair. The wind and the flurries of snow which came flying toward her were irritating, but she could cover her eyes with a leisurely wave of her hands. "Although, Lady Seal, it seems that you aren't having as easy of a time as I am," Christina calmly observed. While swallowing the swear words that threatened to erupt, Seal resumed glaring ahead of her. The sight of Mare, who was giggling away while sitting on the wolf's back, was the most annoying thing of all. Above Rossrock, a man who looked so beautiful that it was hard to believe that he was a man was holding his coat closed. While staring in the direction of Eugene's back, which had at some point receded into the distance, the man licked his lips. "Your Majesty," the man muttered. This whisper wasn't directed at anyone here but instead to the territory of his queen far away from here. "Eugene Lionheart has departed from here," he reported. "In the Devildom of Helmuth, the Black Shadow Forest, which just until a year ago had been the territory of the Rakshasa prince and home to the dark elves who followed her. It was a gigantic forest that had retained its primordial appearance. However, almost nothing remained of the appearance that the Black Shadow Forest had at that time. Trees had been cut down in swathes and neat roads had been laid down on top of the soil. Buildings that might be seen in the capital city of Pandemonium were being erected in ones and twos by the undead, human and demon folk workers that had been hired by the Dreaming Construction Company. In the middle of all this, a statue of Noir Giabella that reproduced her alluring figure had been completed. Ahaha. Morgiabella, who had been sitting on top of her own giant statue's head, bared her teeth in laughter. Chapter 224. Scalia 1. The unnamed merchant of Rossrock had advised staying away from any flags depicting black dogs. It was perhaps a valid word of caution for any merchants. However, the mercenaries in question were only relatively famous in the region of Ruhr, which meant that they were nothing for Eugene to worry about. What would he do if he chanced upon the flags in the distance during his journey? He probably wouldn't go out of his way to avoid them. It wasn't that he wanted to ignore the merchant's advice, but he also couldn't be bothered to avoid a group he did not fear. Indeed, it just so happened that Eugene came across the flags of the Black Dog mercenaries. However, the flag of the Black Dogs was cemented in the snow instead of flapping in the wind. It wasn't just their flag either. Debris from their carts and sleds was laden across the snow, and even frozen bodies were buried in the snow. Eugene observed the scattered corpses and identified bodies of snow wolves, reindeer, horses, and other domesticated animals that would have pulled the carts and sleds, as well as the mercenaries themselves. It wasn't a monster attack, Cyan remarked after observing the mess from Eugene's side. A week had already passed since they departed from Rossrock, and Cyan was standing barefoot on the snowfield as if this was the most natural thing to do. That wasn't all either. A fierce snowstorm was raging on even at this moment, but the flurries never touched his body. He was manipulating fine mana that was almost invisible to the eye with extreme precision to push the snow away. They slaughtered them as if it were a joke, Seal commented. She was more accustomed to inspecting such events compared to Cyan since the Black Lion Knights performed many different tasks for the Lionheart family, which included examining and handling corpses as basic fundamental knowledge. It looks like it was done by a single person. Of course, there could have been more, but for this incident, only a single person was responsible for slaughtering the mercenaries here. Seal continued with her analysis after pondering for a moment. She didn't appear unaffected. Nevertheless, Seal continued to closely examine the bodies for wounds and other hints. Eugene agreed with Seal's assessment. Just as she said, only one person was responsible for killing the mercenaries. But they had not been alone. Although the snow had wiped out most of the traces, it was possible to deduce the formation the assaulters group had taken in the beginning, as well as the patterns of the battle from the locations and the conditions of the corpses, sleds and carts. There was at least one other person who was keeping watch, Eugene added while kicking over the corpse in front of him. Seal had also been correct in her initial statement. They had been killed in a nonchalant, joking manner as if the perpetrator had not been concerned at all. The one responsible had not swung their blade with the intent to kill. Instead, they had stayed faithful to their desire to cut their opponents. The wounds indicated that the one responsible had wielded their blade not because they wanted to kill the mercenaries but because they wanted to cut them. As such, the cuts on the bodies were promiscuous and shallow. The mercenaries had been hurt, allowed to run, then cut down from behind. In a field as open and wide as this, one could escape in any direction if one wanted to. However, all of the mercenaries had fallen while fleeing in a specific direction. In other words, their choice had been limited in their path of escape, indicating another presence besides the killer who had been blocking their retreat. But the one tasked with preventing their escape had not wielded their blade but only herded the mercenary. Who could it be? Muttered Cyan. At first he thought it could have been infighting between the mercenaries. Since they were said to be vile, it wouldn't have come as a surprise if any internal strife immediately led to stabbings. But judging from the traces left behind, what had occurred here was neither a battle due to internal conflict nor an execution between the mercenaries. Instead, it was a playful game of slaughter and execution. I get that they've done bad things here and there, but this isn't a result of resentment, Cyan remarked grimly. The Black Dog mercenaries had been en route to Lehane to participate in the night march, but in their bad fortune, they had encountered a killer who slaughtered for pleasure. The corpses weren't old either. Although it was difficult to determine their exact time of death due to how frozen they were, it was always snowing in this field. It was snowing right now as well, and it had been snowing earlier too. It snowed in the morning, at dawn, and at night. Nevertheless, the bodies and the various debris weren't completely buried. What will you do? Christina asked after standing up once she was done praying for the dead. She continued while looking back at Eugene with worried eyes. I don't know the identity of the attacker, but if they are targeting those who are participating in the night march, isn't there the possibility that they will attack us as well? Then I'll just ask them, said Eugene with a shrug before gesturing to Abel. Mare was pinching her nose with a frown while riding on Abel's back. She pouted while looking alternatingly at the corpses and the candy in her hand. My candy is as red as blood. I lost my appetite, I don't want to eat it anymore. Then don't. It'll make your teeth rot anyways, answered Eugene. My teeth will never rot no matter how many candies I eat. And you telling me not to eat them made me want to eat them again, Sir Eugene. Mare stuck out her tongue, which was red from eating the candy. After glancing over at Mare, Eugene approached Abel and stroked his forehead. Smell it and follow it. Is that really necessary? Asked Mare. It's better to find this unknown crazy killer than to be wary, Eugene answered simply. But what if it's someone really strong? Mare questioned back. They're not that strong. You can tell from how they use their sword. The person who was watching might be stronger, but that's more the reason we should find them first, responded Eugene. Snow wolves possessed an excellent sense of smell, and the wolves as well as monsters could track their prey even during a powerful snowstorm. Moreover, Abel was quite intelligent, just as the Beast King had promised, so he understood exactly what Eugene wanted. Sniff, sniff, sniff. Abel sniffed the ground while walking between the bodies, then gave a low cry. He then raised his head and turned back before glancing at Mare. Mare gave him a smile, then patted Abel's rump. She had developed a good relationship with him during the week they spent together. Abel charged forward, followed by Seal and Cyan. Christina also unfolded her wings of light and soared into the sky. Eugene took his place at the party's rear to prepare for any unexpected situations. He expanded his senses to monitor the surrounding area and prepared himself to intervene immediately if something unexpected happened. Not long after, they encountered more corpses belonging to the Black Dog mercenaries. The bodies belonged to those who had escaped, or rather had been let go. It was as if the killer had played a game of tag, allowing the mercenaries to run before chasing them down. It wasn't one or two bodies either. These were less than the dozens of bodies they initially encountered, but there were still 5 or 6 corpses at each encounter. The scent Abel pursued grew stronger as they saw more and more corpses. The distance between the killings grew further apart, but Abel dashed forward with even more confidence as he continued. The snow wolf traveled quite fast when it was locked onto its target, so fast that ordinary knights would have difficulty chasing after it. However, Seal and Cyan managed to keep up with Abel while staying faithful to Eugene's instructions from the first day. Eugene felt rather proud of their growth. Hamel had never had any successors, and although Cyan and Seal weren't technically Hamel's successors, it pleased him to see them following instructions and growing stronger. Although the habit he instilled in them of finely manipulating mana wouldn't immediately push them to 5 stars of the White Flame formula, it would certainly serve as a cornerstone for their growth in the future. The twins weren't the only ones who were presented with the opportunity to grow through Eugene. After suffering because of Eugene's constant visits to the dark room, Gilead and Guion were on the cusp of stepping into the 7th star of the White Flame formula. Unfortunately, Carmen did not experience the same growth that pushed her to the boundary, but she was still satisfied with her achievements. Bloodlion, thanks to you I was able to create a new technique besides Destiny Breaker. Call it Gungnir. I think it will be a good match against your secret technique, Eclipse. Why don't we have a go? How did you find out about Eclipse, Lady Carmen? Mare told me. Eclipse. That's a nice name. Bloodlion, how did you manage to blacken the sun to create an eclipse? The charming familiar had been hiding the fact that she had sneakily engaged with Eugene's mind during the time he developed Eclipse. Then she had gone on to blabber the name which Eugene didn't want anyone to know, to none other than Carmen. Eugene trembled as he reflected on the anger, shame and self-loathing he had felt then. He had thought that the good smack he gave Mare on her head had been sufficient at the time, but he felt a rising desire to run forward and give her another smack as he recalled the memory. After glaring at the back of Mare's head for a moment, he suddenly spoke. Stop. His words reached all the way to the front, and Abel stopped even before Mare could give the order. It was a sudden command, but Seal and Cyan immediately stopped in their tracks in an unusually neat motion as if someone had grabbed them from behind. What's wrong? Asked Christina as she approached Eugene, who felt pretty satisfied. Instead of answering, Eugene raised his right hand. He formed signs with just one hand. Christina's eyes glimmered when she saw it, and Mare also gave a small burst of exclamation while riding on Abel's back. Whoosh. A small spark formed into existence in front of Eugene's right hand. It was a purple flame created from Eugene's white flame formula, and with a flick of his finger the flame soared into the sky. "What did you just do?" asked Cyan with a confused expression. Mare burst out laughing as if she had been waiting. "Well, let me explain. That is something Sir Eugene has been working hard on in Arath. His signature." Mare, be quiet," Eugene growled with a glare. Mare grumbled while pouting, "You don't even bother to finish the word Meridian anymore?" Eugene ignored her. His view connected with the flame and expanded, even without having to close his eyes. There was a limit to how far a human could expand their mana to scout their surroundings. However, if you used mana to cast magic, the radius could be increased significantly depending on the level of the wizard. The flame itself wasn't Eugene's signature. Just as generic Osman had gone through several stages while developing his signature Yggdrasil, this flame was just one of the steps Eugene had taken in creating his signature. He spotted the things that had been bothering his senses and saw the sight clearly through his flame. 2 people were standing in front of 3 dead bodies. In addition, one person was kneeling on the snow as a sword carved his neck like a saw blade. "This is crazy," grumbled Eugene as he extinguished the flame. Although he had not bothered to guess who the attacker would be, the person he saw was someone truly unexpected, and in all honesty he didn't really want to proceed any further if it entailed meeting this person. No matter how he looked at it, they weren't normal. However, the 2 of them had met gazes right before Eugene extinguished the flame, and he didn't know if the attacker would try to head toward his group. As far as Eugene could tell, the attacker was still unmoving. If they had not sensed Eugene's presence, there would be no need for the 2 groups to meet. However, Eugene judged there was a need to take the initiative to meet them if they had sensed him and would try to target him and his group. The opponent was someone in a position of power. Eugene and the others were no longer in a rush to advance, and both Mare and Abel backed up as well. None of them wanted to provoke their opponents, regardless of the power disparity that might exist between them. Would they take the initiative? Or would they leave without caring? The latter was unlikely, and from the trail of blood they had left in their path, the former would probably come true, but the attackers remained in their spot. The 2 of them remained unmoving from where Eugene had spotted them. Ugh. Seal frowned. It was hardly snowing where they were, which meant that the ground was still vividly colored crimson with blood. The heat of the red liquid had already dissipated, but the unique fishy smell of the expunged filth from the dead heavily stained the nearby area. There was more blood and odor than usual coming from a simple corpse because they had been killed in such a gruesome way. Eugene spread his cloak without a word. Mare wasn't afraid of the sight, but she still thought it was terrible. As such, she didn't protest against Eugene's invitation and unhesitatingly entered her haven. In the meantime, Christina recited prayers for the dead after giving a small sigh. "Don't tell me," Cyan said after hesitating for a while. His hand remained on the pommel of the sword hanging from his waist. "Princess Scalia Animus?" The 2 people standing up ahead adorned armor emitting a pale purple light but forewent any sort of thick winter coats suitable for the freezing land. Although their armor looked to be made of metal, it did not stick to the flesh in the cold. Mithril was famous for being capable of embracing mana on its own, but their armor was made of something even more valuable, Orhalcon. An armor made of this rare metal protected its owner's body from all kinds of harm, even without a separate inscription or enchantment of magic. The armor was known as Exid and it belonged to the Sea Kingdom of Shimuan. In particular, Exid, created using large amounts of Orhalcon, was the symbol of the kingdom's royal knights. The bloodstained knight raised their head. It was the same knight who had been sawing the head off the body in front of them like a maniac. It was hard to tell their gender due to the exid covering their chest, but they were rather petite, which indicated they were likely a girl. In addition, inscribed on their chest plate was a depiction of waves and a whirlpool, which was the symbol of the violent tide knights, and the eagle soaring above it represented the royal family. Clack. The helmet flipped open, and once it reclined like a hood, red hair poured out like a waterfall. How impudent. It was Princess Scalia, Vice Commander of the Violent Tide Knights, nicknamed the Princess Knight. "How is it that you don't lower your heads, bend your backs and kneel knowing well who I am?" Her orange eyes glimmered between her messy bangs. It was difficult to tell why her eyes had lost focus and why there were deep dark bags under her eyes. "Your vulgar actions have insulted me." Or are you the colleagues or family of the rascals I just punished? I thought I had disciplined everyone, but could it be that traces of the muddy filth still remained? She continued. What? Cyan asked, confused. Shut your mouth, you lowlife. I, Princess Scalia, have not given you permission to open your dirty mouth. Scalia retorted immediately with a glare after hearing Cyan's flustered question. She flicked away the blood staining her sword. I mistakenly thought that I had killed enough, but clearly this white land is still filled with filth. Fine. I, Princess Scalia, will act on behalf of the barbarian king. And grace your filth with enlightenment. Only a painful hell awaits those who are unscrupulous. Wait, Princess Scalia. Cyan called out. Do not taint my name with that filthy, vulgar mouth of yours, you trash. The stench oozing from your maw makes me sick, shouted Scalia, and Cyan quickly clasped his hand over his mouth in surprise. A stench? That couldn't be true. Cyan's eyes quivered with shock as Scalia strode toward them with heavy breaths. Hey, what do we do? Asked Seal while looking back at Eugene in surprise. They were up against the Princess of Shimuan. No matter what she said, they couldn't simply retort in kind. Moreover, Scalia's current condition was bizarre. Eugene, Seal, and Cyan were all wearing uniforms engraved with the symbol of the lion hearts. But instead of showing any sign of recognition, Scalia was openly expressing anger and disgust toward them, mistaking them as the colleagues or family of the dead mercenaries. Princess. The other knights spoke up when they saw Scalia striding forward. He was also armed in exit and his face was covered with a helmet. However, it was clear from his voice that the knight was a young man. They are neither colleagues nor family of the mercenaries you punished, Princess. Then why are they acting so impudent towards my royal self? Why are they still not showing respect to me? Asked Scalia. This is not Shimuan, and they aren't ones with status low enough to kneel unconditionally out of respect for you, Princess, the knight answered. It is difficult for my royal self to understand what you are saying. Feel very dizzy. I can't see very well either. Who in the world are they? Asked Scalia. They are the young lions of the lion hearts, the descendants of the great Vermouth, answered Dior. What? Exclaimed Scalia before coming to a stop. She looked straight ahead, then down at the sword in her hand before shaking her head vigorously. That cannot be. I do not see them as the lions of lion hearts. It must be because you are so tired, Princess. Please listen to me. Stop. I will not listen. How could I, Scalia Animus, not attend the gathering of famous knights from all over the world? Shouted Scalia before collapsing on the spot. If it's because of fatigue, I can just rest right away. Dior, prepare to rest immediately. Yes. The man Dior bowed his head. His helmet was still obscuring his face, and when he raised his head again, his gaze remained on Eugene for a moment. All of you, come over here and sit, said Scalia. Come and speak. Why were you lot wandering in the snowy field, and why did you stand in the way of my royal self? We were on our way to the night march as members of the Lionheart family, answered Cyan, his hands still clasped over his mouth. Scalia snorted before shaking her head. Do not lie, you lowly peasant. If you really are members of the Lionheart family, then why are your manners so shabby? Where are the brave knights of Lionheart? I have seen straight through your lies. How dare you try to deceive me? I will have you executed immediately shouted Scalia. Then why were you wandering the snowy fields with only a single knight accompanying you, Princess? Eugene asked after quietly listening to the conversation for a while. I saw the people you killed, Princess. The Black Dog mercenaries. I've heard that they were a rotten bunch, but the method of their execution was excessive for the nature of the crimes they. How dare you try to judge the nature of their crime? You are not qualified, roared Scalia, interrupting Eugene. Then what qualifications do you possess to judge them, Princess? Asked Eugene. My royal self has only responded to the cries of the poor, asking for their punishment. You ask why I was wandering the snowfields with only one knight? It was 1 week ago. My royal self and the violent tide knights stopped by a village of the natives to rest. However, the village had already been looted to the point of starvation, to the extent that they couldn't find the means to survive the immediate cold, thundered Scalia. It was a terrible crime committed by those scum mercenaries who looted the village before the violent tide knights stopped by. My royal self found the people of the village pitiful and released the supplies of the violent tide knights and distributed them to the village. Then I decided to punish the scum myself since it was the right thing to do. However, it was clearly too much to mobilize all the knights just to punish a simple group of mercenaries. While Scalia talked, Dior finished setting up camp. He set up a tent against the snowstorm and laid a wide cloth over the ground. Once he rolled a small sphere in the middle, the object swelled up greatly and started emitting heat and light. Princess Scalia continued. So I decided to chase and punish them alone, and the commander of the violent tide knights willingly allowed me to carry out this righteous task. That is why my royal self was wandering around with Dior, my aide, to clean up the trash. So, did you say that my method of execution was excessive? They were sinners who deserved to die writhing in pain. The villagers might have died in the freezing cold if I had not taken care of them. Isn't it only right for the sinners who caused such pain and suffering to suffer before they die? While she continued, Dior climbed into the tent and sat down. Instead of taking off her exit, Scalia grabbed and embraced the warm sphere with both hands. Princess. No. I am fine. I do not need to rest. Scalia felt her tired eyes threatening to close. After grinding her teeth while staying still, she threw the sphere out of the tent. I don't need this. I don't need anything like this. My sword. No. I need to rest a little. She was contradicting herself over and over. Indeed, Scalia's condition was beyond understanding. Please come and sit down, said Dior. Scalia said no more and sat before embracing her knees while chewing on her lips.